Little bit. I got to tell you, neither team looked good, obviously. I think it was more important that the Cowboys did not look good at all, obviously, until the last two drives of the game. And the Giants kind of showed what they are, at least on the defensive side of the ball, specifically on the back end. So I don't think Eagles fans are going to have to worry about the Giants this season. And it's pretty clear that the Cowboys are going to miss an 1,800-yard rusher more than they think they were going to.
I wanted to ask you more about that. We talked about this on Tuesday. We'll be live at the Golden Nugget tomorrow, John and I, to recap the Eagles and the Falcons. You could get an 1,800-yard rusher and move on from him. It's going to happen. He might not get those 1,800 yards again. But even if you give Randall or whoever 1,300 yards, they're still 500 yards short. My question really is, what is the identity of the Dallas offense now?
Well, you saw it. It morphed back into a pass-first offense, and that's a concern because we have seen that movie before, as I wrote. So there's going to be some high points because Tony Romo's a darn good quarterback, and you saw that in the fourth quarter. Believe it or not, he's been the best fourth-quarter quarterback for years in the NFL by passer rating standards. So he generally gets it done in the clutch, but anytime you're fighting back as opposed to what they were last year, just dominating the time of possession and moving the chains with the running game, it becomes a tougher hill to climb. And you saw that last night because they were losing to an inferior team and needed last-second heroics to win the football game.
Yeah, and, I said this last night. I don't know if you saw some of the tweets that I had out there about, look, I like Romo. I'm not a Romo hater at all. But he only threw the ball over 40 times in a game once the entire year, and that was an overtime game. He threw 45 times last night. I mean, is this going to be where they're going to have to ask him to throw 35 to 40 times every week?
Well, it's looking like that, but again, things changed too because Des Bryant broke his foot. So now it's going to be more difficult to throw the football. And understand, they needed every single one of those 45 throws. The last one won the football game. So this is not what I think the Cowboys envisioned. They want to go running back by committee. They actually ran the ball okay, but they obviously don't trust the guys they have. Yep. As much as they did Murray, and that's the concern. Maybe you have to look at the offensive play caller, Scott Linehan, and say, hey, you got to go back to the drawing board and at least, pay more attention to the running aspect of things.
Well, John, I'd say the same thing. Look, it's not that they ran poorly, although they only ended up with 3.5 yards a carry. They were up over that for a little while. It's not that they ran poorly. It's just that they didn't trust it or they didn't feature it or they weren't defined last night by running the ball. It's like they did it just because they weren't down in that game to where they had to get away from it. They just chose to get away from it, it looked like.
Yeah, and some of it possibly could have been the opponent because the Giants on paper looked really, really weak, specifically at safety. So maybe they came in thinking we could take advantage of that. But then if you watch the game, there was a lot of dinking and dunking. They weren't trying to stretch the field and put those safeties on islands. So, it was week one for everybody, and maybe it was just a tough week one for the coaching staff. Maybe they just came in and had a poor game plan, and they can turn things around. But certainly the early returns, at least, don't look promising for the Cowboys.
Well, and now they lose Des Bryant for 4 to 6 weeks, potentially longer. You break your foot. He's a big guy. You get concerned when you hear that foot area there. What are they without Des Bryant now? I know I like Romo, and I can't stress that enough. I like watching him. I think he's great. But with him without Des Bryant and a lack of running game, what are they now?
Well, they still have talent. I mean, Terrence Williams is a pretty good number 2 receiver, and obviously Jason Witten's a Hall of Fame tight end. You kind of saw one of the positives last night was Lance Dunbar as a receiver. Maybe he can develop into sort of that consistent slot threat or wheel route threat coming out of the backfield. So they have some things. But anytime you lose, a guy who's arguably the best receiver in the game, certainly amongst the top 3 or 4, it's tough to replace. And it's Terrence Williams is a great 2, but as a 1, he's going to start seeing the double teams, and all of a sudden Cole Beasley has to jump up in rotation, and that's never good for anybody. You're seeing the same thing in Green Bay with losing Jordy Nelson.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. For more on this game, John, you wrote a piece over the weekend. It was a really good piece about Byron Maxwell, and a lot of people checked it out over the weekend. What exactly was Maxwell trying to get across there about heading down to Atlanta?
Well, I asked him about traveling to somebody. So many people have assumed that he would shadow Julio Jones because Jones is right there with a guy like Dez Bryant as one of the top receivers in football. And anytime you pay a corner as much as the Eagles paid Byron Maxwell, you say, hey, maybe we can let him shadow Julio Jones all over the football field and shut him down that way. But that looks like it's not going to be the plan, at least according to Byron.
Should that be the plan? Should that be the plan, John, though? I mean, sorry to interject. They pay him a lot of money. Should a guy being paid that kind of money be a guy who shadows your number one?
You know, I don't think necessarily this week, because number two's not bad either, and Roddy White, he can beat you just as bad. So maybe when you have a bigger difference between the number one and number two receivers, maybe then you go to Byron Maxwell and say, look, we need to shut this guy down. But in this case, you know, Roddy White is just as capable as putting up big numbers as Julio Jones. So I think it's prudent to just stay on sides at least this week. And it would have been against Dallas, but now without Dez Bryant, all of a sudden things can shift. But the second part of that is he's more comfortable with it, because understand he comes from Seattle, and Richard Sherman, obviously the top-tier cornerback there, he doesn't switch sides. He doesn't shadow people. He just stays anchored at his position.
Yeah, John, obviously, let me ask you about this particular game tonight. You do a lot of national stuff, too, for today's Pigskin.com. Tell me a little bit about what worries you with this Falcons team. I feel like they are kind of overlooked. They haven't been very good the last 2 years. They are better at home. They do have a new head coach. Mike Smith is gone. Dan Quinn is in. You know, the quarterback's good. They got some weapons. If there's something that worries you for tonight, what is it?
The rebuilt front. Besides, the obvious thing is the passing game. So that I put that caveat on it because you know it's going to be difficult with Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Roddy White. So you know that going in. But I think people kind of overlook what Dan Quinn has built on defense, and he has a very big physical front with Saleh and Hegeman and Vic Beasley, the rookie, who's going to flop from side to side and is their best pass rusher. So Tyson Jackson's also up front. So they have some guys that could really, really get after you as far as the run game goes. And if the Eagles don't get that going early and turn into a one-dimensional team, that could be an issue.
Let me ask you about the running game for the Philadelphia Eagles. And you know, in your opinion, is tonight a Sam Bradford game or is tonight a running game? You know, in other words, what's the weak spot of the Atlanta defense? Where do you anticipate them going to win this kind of game tonight?
Well, the weak spot is a linebacker, really, and that's where you could see some of those routes you saw that worked so well in Green Bay in the preseason, specifically Darren Sproles coming out of the backfield, because certainly Atlanta doesn't have any linebackers that can stick with a player like that. And, you know, I think that should be in Chip Kelly's mind as far as the passing game goes. But, you know, if it's a Chip Kelly team, the run game is first and foremost. It's always going to be, not just week 1, week 2 through week 16. They want to get that running game going. Everything is based off of that. And then they start creating space in the passing game. So it's always important for the Eagles to get things going on the ground.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, I don't know, Dan Quinn, a defensive-minded guy coming from Seattle, but they have not been, in fact, I think they were the worst defense in football last year. This just seems like it's a very good matchup for Chip Kelly. Let me ask you about Chip. Now in year number 3, you know, a lot of times your first year, you make mistakes. You're growing into the league. Year number 2, you get a little, but now year number 3, do you think the coach is further along and more organized than he was the last 2 years? Do you see a much more confident and prepared Chip? Not that he was unprepared or not confident, but do you see him now as Chip Kelly, NFL head coach, as opposed to Chip Kelly, the guy from college?
Yeah, I mean, you know, detractors will always, you know, put that college tag on because they like to do that. But Yeah, I certainly think he's a lot more confident because it comes from the fact he knows his system can now be successful on the NFL level. Not as successful as he wants to be or plans to be, but the bottom line is 10 wins in this league is very, very difficult, and he's done it twice in a row. So certainly that breeds confidence, and he has some of that. Whether that he takes that to the next step, we'll have to see. My main concern about the logistics and the organization is taking on the extra role as general manager, but it seems like he's handed that off to Ed Manowitz, and I think that's good because you can't go through an NFL season worrying about, scouting college players for next year's draft.
Yeah, and obviously Chip Kelly, I think, went out and picked the guys that he really wants here. They have a top 5 offense in the 2 years under Kelly. The Falcons have had a bottom 5 defense the last 2 years. They were the worst last year. I think it's a bad matchup for Atlanta. And even if the Falcons are improved, this is a game that you probably see. You would anticipate the Eagles getting up there, 27 to 35 points tonight?
Yeah, I had them at 34. I think they're going to be explosive offensively, as you mentioned, the top 5 2 years in a row. So clearly Chip Kelly's offensive scheme is difficult to deal with. I often talk about Atlanta's a perfect example. They're not going to play anybody else who runs their philosophy like Chip Kelly. It's not going to be up-tempo. So it's very difficult to prepare for that. You don't practice for it a lot because Atlanta's more concerned with the Carolina Panthers and the New Orleans Saints than the Philadelphia Eagles. So basically they cram it into 1 week, in this case 2 weeks because it's the season opener, and it's difficult to prepare for the Eagles' tempo in that short a time. So that's the one advantage to me the Eagles have just about every week. Even in the division with teams like the Cowboys and Giants, because they're not preparing for that tempo all the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Philadelphia playing Atlanta, I don't think they've ever faced the Falcons in Chip Kelly's, tenure here. Now, Dan Quinn was with Seattle last year. You wonder if he's watching some game tape of that. But how much has the personnel changes with the Eagles changed their, you just said they've been a top 5 offense in the league the last 5 years. They seem to have added better talent. Should we anticipate a better offense?
Well, I don't know how much better it can go. Obviously, you can go from 4 to 1 or 3 to 1 or whatever. But if you're top 5, you're top 5. You're very good, and I think it speaks to the reason why. And some people think this is an insult. It isn't really. Chip Kelly's a system coach. He believes in the system. He's not changing his system no matter who is in it, whether it's Nick Foles, Sam Bradford, or Marcus Mariota. He's not changing it for anybody. He's going to run the same stuff, and we've seen that consistently, and it works. So the question is Sam Bradford a better fit at quarterback than the other quarterbacks that have been here, specifically Foles, who, for whatever you want to criticize him for, he was 14-4 as a starter here. Is DeMarco Murray a better fit than LaShawn McCoy? These are the questions that are all going to be answered.
What'd you think of Foles yesterday? I know you wrote a piece about it over at 97.3 ESPN.com. I thought he played brilliant yesterday. He had some great throws late in that game. He made, he held onto the ball, had made some mistakes. I thought he played better than I anticipated. Now, I would say that I don't think that Seattle defense, or specifically the secondary, is the one that you saw last year here in Philadelphia. Of course, Nick didn't play in that game, but what was your overall take on Nick Foles with the Rams?
He was great, and you're right. Cam Chancellor wasn't there, but Richard Sherman was, Earl Thomas was. This is still the Seattle Seahawks, and I think the Rams, kind of look at it as, hey, we've had guys in the past, and we all know who we're talking about, that weren't able to get this kind of thing done. And people constantly talk about the lack of weapons, and then you add to that Foles didn't have Gurley or Trey Mason. His top 2 running backs were out, and all of a sudden Tavon Austin looks like a playmaker. Kenny Britt looks like a playmaker. Lance Kendricks. We always talk about great quarterbacks make the players around them better. I'm not saying Nick Foles is a great quarterback, but he certainly did that yesterday.
Yeah, and obviously, keep this in mind, people. Bradford was not the quarterback of the Rams last year, so it's not like he was the problem.
2 years.
Yeah, he wasn't. He was the problem that they had last year. I mean, they had quarterback issues last year. Austin Davis was just ill-prepared to be an NFL quarterback. Other takes on Week 1 yesterday, just from me, that I want to get your take on in watching. Mariota yesterday was, I thought, brilliant in terms of the decision-making, but they didn't ask him to do a lot, and I thought Tampa was terrible. Should we anticipate that Mariota has jumped right into the NFL and is going to be successful, or do you think he's going to take his lumps and be very up and down?
No, he's going to take his lumps and he's going to be up and down. I mean, but that's any rookie quarterback. That's not.
Well, he didn't look like a rookie yesterday.
No, you have a perfect passer rating, and there's good and bad. The good is that's phenomenal. Bad is there's only you can only go down from there. But Tampa Bay, if you think about it, obviously they're the only team in professional football that still uses the cover two as their base defense, and we've seen it a couple years ago when Dallas used it. Was 32nd in the league. Minnesota used it. They were 31st. So the two worst defenses in football were using that. Lovie Smith goes down there. He takes Leslie Frazier. Hey, I don't want to insult Marcus Mariota because what he did was great. But if he did that against, say, a Rex Ryan defense, I would have been more impressed. I'm not sure that just because he played that well yesterday means that much.
Yeah, we'll see. I thought he was great yesterday. He made some good throws, but a lot of it was very short, 13 for 16, 4 touchdowns. We'll see as he evolves in week number 2. A couple other quick hits on yesterday's games. What'd you think of Peyton Manning?
I think it was a square peg in a round hole. I don't think it's going to work. I mean, the one strength of Peyton Manning's game at age 39 is the ability to go up to the line of scrimmage, survey the defense, and, make adjustments. And the Broncos are taking that out of his hands. They want to be a run-first team. They want to replicate what happened to John Elway at the end of his career when it became Terrell Davis's team and he won the Super Bowls. On the positive side, that defense was awesome. And if they continue to play like that, the Broncos are still going to be a good football team. But I don't think that offense fits Peyton Manning at all.
More on the games tomorrow as John and I are live for 4 hours. I'm sure we'll be breaking down many of these games. We'll also have our who's in and who's out after week number 1 in the NFL is officially over. John, your official pick for tonight is?
Pick the Eagles by a touchdown. I think, they're clearly the better football team. They got to get it done. But people need to realize it's very difficult to win on the road in this league, especially week 1 when everybody's so hyped up. And I always say some of the bad teams don't know how bad they are, so they're sky high. And I think you'll see that in Atlanta. And unfortunately, I think as good as the Eagles' offense could be, they put their defense behind the 8 ball by the way they run things. And Atlanta's going to be able to score some points, but the Eagles will outscore them.
Should be fun tonight. Finally here. The coverage starts at 6 on 97.3 ESPN. John and I live tomorrow at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City. We'll recap Eagles and Falcons and the rest of week 1 in the NFL. I'll see you tomorrow, pal.
Hey, see you. Thanks, Mike.